So why don't I go ahead and get started? I know that people will be coming on as they can get dialed in, but my name is Diane Silverman and I'm the Executive Director of the Quorum Initiative, and we are beyond thrilled to have Marcia Henderson with us today, an amazing woman who has a lot to say. And her title is one of her quotes that she gives us advice to people when they ask her. She does a lot of work with mentees. But anyway, the quote and the title of the today's segment is Let Your Excellence Lead the Way. I'm going to turn this over now to Marta Hill-Gray, who is one of the Quorum's advisory members, and she will start with the introductions. Quickly, if you have technical problems, please feel to send me a question privately in the chat function. If you have a general question for Marcia, you can send them to everyone, and then we will add these questions as we have time. So thank you all again, and Marta, I'll let you take over.
Thank you, Diane. Welcome, everybody. What an exciting day for us with Quorum. We've got two fabulous women who are going to lead us in the conversation. One is Quorum member Tara Junta. She is a partner in the litigation department at Paul Hastings, and she's a vice chair of the investigations and white collar defense practice. She also serves as the co-chair of the firm's Global Diversity Council and chair of the firm's Women's Initiative. So she's all girl all the time, like the rest of us. Ms. Junta is also the founder and editor of the firm's publication, Breaking the Glass Ceiling, Women in the Boardroom, and speaks often on corporate governance, compliance, and internal investigations, as well as onboard diversity. So that is the woman who is leading us. Our guest today is Marcia Henderson, who I am proud to say is a dear friend and someone I look up to enormously. Marcia is a nationally recognized innovative leader and change agent for the health of women and their families. She's the former Associate Commissioner for the Women's Health at the Food and Drug Administration. She was there for a decade and progressed and managed cutting-edge policy, research, and educational initiatives. The Office of Women's Health advanced its scientific efforts under her direction to produce more than 350 research papers and journal articles to facilitate FDA's regulatory decision-making and promote a better understanding of sex differences and health conditions unique to women. I cannot tell you how big a deal that is, tragically. To say it again, sex differences and health conditions unique to women. There you go. Her colleagues applaud her ability to set a vision and guide the concept to reality. One FDA commissioner stated, she is elegant, not just in style, but in character, confidence, and compassion. And that indeed is the Marcia I know. So enjoy Marcia today, enjoy Tara, and Tara, take it away. We're really thrilled and honored to have you both here.
Thank you, Marta. Appreciate it. And Marcia, it's a pleasure to share this next hour with you and to hear from you and have a conversation with you and the broader group. I just did want to say to everybody on this call that if you have a question, if you could type it into the chat group and make sure it's sent to everyone, I'll see it, and we'll try to feed that in as appropriate throughout our conversation and reserve some time at the end if appropriate for that purpose as well. So Marcia, Marta has shared your resume, your background, your accomplishments, which are many, but what we'd also like to hear from you is your journey and what kind of brought you to where you are today. If you could share that with us, that would be great.
Well, first, let me thank you for this invitation. I became familiar with your organization last week when you had the amazing Janet Thomas on, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And so I hope that today will be at least almost as interesting. I will say that my journey has been a very unlikely one. It would not have been anticipated when I came out of graduate school with a degree in city and regional planning that I would end my career in federal service as the Associate Commissioner for Women's Health at the Food and Drug Administration. Most people know that FDA is a science-based organization. It's world-renowned as the gold standard for so many of the products that we use every day. Just to give you a little background, FDA is responsible for about 25% of all goods and services that are manufactured in the United States. Everything from all foods, except meat and poultry, all drugs, prescription and over the counter, biologics, which include vaccines, blood, semen, um, tobacco regulation was also added to that category, as well as medical devices, everything from heart devices to, you know, uh, tongue depressors. So
we have a lot more than
the
that.
breadth of
We
FDA
have
is quite astounding. And as you've indicated, many of you know that in the 90s, women went to the Hill and said, we are very concerned about many of the clinical trials not being tested on women. That said, why would I be there? Actually, as I said, my journey's been most unlikely. For the most part, I have been identified for every position I've ever had. I was identified to be the associate commissioner, and I was shocked because usually you apply for the position, and the position clearly stated you needed to be a scientist. And I wasn't a scientist. And I had been there not for 1 decade, 2 decades, when I first started at FDA. And, you know, you work at the preference of the commissioner. And so the commissioner asked me to certainly stand in while we looked for, or while she looked for a new associate. And I had been the deputy, and I assumed I would stay the deputy because, as I said, my portfolio didn't indicate that I was a scientist. And most of the team were physicians, PhDs, PharmDs. And so when she asked me to be the woman in charge of the women's office, I was surprised. I was delighted, but I was surprised. And I ended up working under 6 different commissioners. And as I said, I worked at the pleasure of, so each one had the ability to move me somewhere else. And so I was very pleased about that. I will tell you that my journey started really, and some advice I would give to people, I had applied for a job. It was the last one I had ever applied for. And it was to be a supervisor of a unit. And there were 2 positions that were available. And one was for a branch chief position, and another was to be for a division, deputy division director. And it was the same money, but the deputy division director was seen as a higher position. And a man stopped by my little office and said, Marsha, I see you've applied for both of these positions. Which one do you want? And I did the typical woman's thing. Oh, I'd be happy with either one. I just want to serve. And he looked at me with disgust and said, look, you need to figure it out and you need to strut. And he walked away. And that was sage advice. So when I went to the interview, there was a panel of 3 people and he was one. And one of the first questions was, you've applied for these 2 positions. Which one do you want? And I said, well, I could contribute in either one, but I think that I could best serve as the deputy director. Let me tell you why. And I proceeded to present my credentials and I got the position. That taught me something. It said, 1, you need to own who you are. And you need to go in at the top, the very top of whatever is available. And that's sort of been my motto ever since. So I left that position and was seen as a very good supervisor, not a manager, supervisor. And so I then moved to, I was asked to come and deal with the difficult set of employees. And one of the things I figured out was to negotiate. I said, well, I've heard that's a difficult unit. I said, I don't mind, but I'm really happy here. And so if I could get promoted, it would make a big difference in terms of my considering this position. So I got promoted again and went into a very difficult situation. And at every turn, I've learned different things and made myself visible enough to get invited to do something else. So my journey started in the National Health Service Corps, which places doctors in low-income areas. I moved from there, I want to say, to the Women's Bureau to set up FMLA, which was a very new idea, family and medical leave under new legislation. I moved from there to the Homeless Council, where I directed a team of people looking at family homelessness, trying to get families off the street. So as you can see, I've always been focused not only on health, but on serving low-income people, people with special needs, and have enjoyed that thoroughly. And finally, ended up coming to FDA. Each one of these positions was an invitation to me to come and work on special activities. So that's sort of been my journey forward.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Marcia. And I'm jotting down notes of these wonderful suggestions and nuggets that you've shared with us, and we'll recap at the end. But thank you so much. Own who you are is something that resonates, I think, with all of us. And it's also, for me, I speak personally, a good reminder of what we should be doing. When we think about it, you've had a number, obviously, of great accomplishments, and we appropriately focus on that and should focus on that. But what would I'd also appreciate is if you could also share some of your mistakes, some of your challenges, because that, I think we all, not to be corny, but learn from our mistakes, and that can really enrich our positioning of ourselves for something more.
Well, I certainly think you're right. I always say I've learned more from my mistakes than any success. And I had a huge mistake early in my career that I think has really formed my approach to everything I've done since. I think I mentioned that I was the director of placement for the National Health Service Corps. And that position put doctors into low-income communities, urban, rural, federal prisons, and Indian reservations. And it was a very difficult set of circumstances because you were on an annual schedule where you had to place thousands of people coming out of medical school into these locations in 9 months. And so I had a team that worked on computers, and I went in and I knew nothing about this. I just knew that they called it the sweatshop. I didn't know that till I had taken the job, but they called it the sweatshop because you really were on a tight schedule. And this was pre-computer computer capability at the earlier years. So a lot of it was hand done, literally. And so so you would get a directive that you are to report to a certain site. And so every letter was a legal letter. It had the currency of being the force under law. Many people had reneged on their commitment to do this because they got money. They got a scholarship to go to medical school. And it's understandable that people would renege because you're given a list at the beginning and it shows all these wonderful places. And then the legislation changed and made everything rural. So where you thought you might be able to go to New York or Chicago, you now have to go to Bethel, Alaska, or to an Indian reservation where they literally drop in food and supplies. And you're now married. And your husband says to you, well, I'm not going to Bethel. Or you get sent to a place in Alabama where the schools are not accredited by the state of Alabama. So, that's kind of tough. So a lot of them reneged and ended up owing the government hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it was due upon receipt. So you're now a physician and you can't even get a loan to buy a car. So people were very unhappy. Lucky me, I got to be in charge of that unit with all of these people now under congressional mandate to come back in and try again because they had gone to the Hill, very upset about this. And then I had all the regular people who had not been placed. Long story short, it was a very intense time. And I go to my first director's meeting, and the administrator says to me, Henderson, how many people did you place last week in the Indian Health Service? And where are they, and how many more do you need to place? I didn't know. I'd been placing people. We had been sending out letters, but I couldn't tell him. I was so embarrassed. Well, what about the East Coast? Who did you place in Jersey? I didn't know. I went back to the staff and brought them in and explained the problem. And I made it seem that, you know, this is us, right? You are working your behind off. You are doing great things, but I'm sorry I embarrassed you. Not gonna have that again. They put together spreadsheets, and it was a packet, and I took it in the next day. The next Monday, it was every Monday, and he asked me a question. How many did you place? I told him. Who is in Bethel? I told him. Who's in New Jersey? I told him. He said, well, how many are OBGYNs? I told him. I could break it down to the most minute detail. And then it became, because the people in the room were trying to recruit and place and all of this. So my report became the driving force for the entire department. Because if you're recruiting for Indian reservations, you need to know who's been placed and who hasn't, where my vacancies are. My report told them that. He said, the Henderson report will be first on the agenda. Bring copies for everyone. I took my mistake and I made it essential to the entire group. And more importantly, I went back and I said, guess what? We won, right? But what it taught me is something I was taught in graduate school when I was thinking about being a hospital administrator. You got to walk the floor. You've got to know what's going on in your, whatever you're doing, you need to know the data. You need to know the background, whether it's with your team who has certain talents, or whether it's a new vision for where you need to be going. So that mistake made me think to myself, every time I went somewhere, how can I be essential? How can I make my group shine? Because everybody wants to shine. Even the most difficult of employees, even the most difficult task, everyone wants to be a star. And I would also let them know, guess what? My team did this, we did this. And I remember one of my favorite commissioners, Dr. Gottlieb, was the last one that I served under. You see him on TV all the time now with COVID. And he was wonderful. And he had just come to FDA. And most commissioners, you know, senior staff, you're always on the agenda, you know, and I knew that my day was going to be, you know, Tuesday. And I looked on my calendar and I realized he was coming to my office. Normally I would be going to his, but he was very gracious and he was coming to everyone else's office to meet them. And I had an office with glass windows, and on my windows were all of these clear see-through awards that external organizations had given me and my staff. And when he walked in the door, I said, well, welcome, Scott, to the award-winning Office of Women's Health. And I pointed to the window, right? And so one of the things I've learned is you have to let people know about the things that you are doing that are working well. You cannot just do well and keep it silent. And, I've always found that that has been helpful to all of us. So one of the mistake really was making sure that I knew my inventory. I knew where I was going. I knew my mission. I would always know. I always used to set um, goals, very clearly set goals that everyone knew that people were involved in. I wasn't the only one making up the goal, but I would make the decision about which ones we would pursue. But always tracking and making sure that we were getting there.
Great story. It's great to have taken a failure, but a setback, and really turning it into a success and really a distinction. So that's terrific. So we as women, I think, really we strive for perfection. We often see our shortcomings first and kind of engage in that self-doubt and self-criticism. Have you encountered that over the course of your journey, and kind of what are some of the strategies that you've used to try to move beyond any kind of self-doubt?
Well, of course. Yeah, well, of course, we've all had self-doubt, and we have to be honest with ourselves and know what our strengths and weaknesses are, and then try to play to those strengths. But I see somebody's online that can attest to this, but I remember that one of the things about being in my position at FDA, we would do a lot of public speaking. And we would speak all over the country, and we would go internationally as well. As everyone knows, FDA is really a leader internationally. And I've given advice about it, and I've done it myself. I'll first tell you about one of my mentees. I had a graduate student, and she didn't speak up very much. And I said, I'm going to start taking you around, and I'm going to start calling on you. She was very intimidated. She was finishing at Johns Hopkins, the best school of public health in the world. And I took her to this meeting. There were about 2,000 people in the room, huge ballroom. And at the end, people came up and, said how they enjoyed the speech and whatnot. And she's in my car riding back to the office, and she said, I could never do that. Oh, I just could never do that. And I said, yes, you could. She, no. I said, well, if I asked you to go on the stage and say your name, just your name, could you do that? And she said, yes, I could do that. I said, well, why could you do that? She said, because I know my name. I said, yes, and you know your name better than anyone in that room. And I said, the truth is, I could have had you go up there and do my slides because you did my slides. You knew my information better than anyone in that room, just like you know your name. And I said, and let me tell you something else. When you enter rooms with me in meetings, from now on, I want you to speak. I'm going to start turning to you when they ask a question. But don't worry, I'll never turn to you unless I know you know the answer. And when you walk into a room, every time you walk in a room, you need to say, I'm Johns Hopkins, because that's who you are. You're getting that degree, and it says with all the rights and privileges according to you. So you've got to walk in. Well, a couple of years later, she had gotten a position in the agency, not with me. And I saw her name on the agenda. And we were both presenting at a Brookings Institute meeting. And she presented, and she did very well. And of course, afterwards, I go up and hug her. And I said, oh, I'm so proud of you. And she said, I'm Johns Hopkins. And we both laughed about it. But, I did have an intimidating situation. I was scheduled to go to Sweden to present at the Karolinska Institute. And the Karolinska Institute, under it, it says, home of the Nobel Prize. And so when they took me to the day before to show me the venue. They said, you know, this is where we give out the Nobel Prize. And that's intimidating, even when you've spoken a lot. It can be. And don't forget, I'm speaking to blonde-haired, blue-eyed scientist. And I'm not a scientist. And I did pretty well. And what I did was, and I mentioned this of all things at my father's funeral, I once was taking swimming lessons as a kid. And when I took the lessons at a certain point, because we'd been taking them for years, we were to go off the high dive. We were to jump off the high dive. And it was going to go into 12 feet of water, and the dive was very high. And I can't remember, maybe I was 12. And I walked to the middle of the board, and I looked down, and I was like, no, this is not going to work. And I turned around to come back. And my father, who I thought was at work, I heard his voice say, Marsha! And I turned around and I jumped off that board. And it was so exhilarating. When I hit the water, for those who dive, the bubbles shoot you up like a rocket, and it feels fabulous. So when I came up to the surface, I was like so excited, and I got back in line because I wanted to do it again. And many years later, I said to my father, you know, I didn't know you were going to be there. And why did you do that? And he said, because you were prepared. When you prepare, never deny yourself an opportunity to move forward. And so when I stood there, I felt like I was walking on to the end of the high dive. And I took a breath, and then I knew my team had prepared me very well. They had done the slides for me. They had done sort of the murder board of, you know, present. And someone who's on this call said to me the first time I did it, oh God, we got to do that again. So I had the honest review, and I did it over and over until I knew that I could meet the standard that we had set. So I say to people, find something in your life, in your experience, that you overcame, that you say, you know, I didn't think I could do X. It doesn't have to be anything big. It can be something small, and that you can use to motivate you. You know, some people, it's saying a poem or a prayer or some experience they've had. But find your something, find your thing that can help you, because I know that that's the kind of thing that's helped me.
Yeah, great stories. And also reflects your role as a mentor and a sponsor for the woman or the intern who you brought along, and obviously she benefited greatly from your guidance. And just take a minute and tell us a little bit about mentors, sponsors, folks who you encountered who were important to your journey, and then any other words of wisdoms you might have for those of us on the call, both as mentors and as mentees at all stages.
Well, it's so funny now that I've left the government, I find that I had all these mentees I didn't know I had. And they've called me and wanted to take me before COVID to lunch or dinner and said, oh, you know, you've been such a great mentor. And I'm like, really? And so I think back with myself, I didn't have a person that I could call my mentor, but there were many people I observed, and there were certain things I really liked about them or really disliked about them. Because, you know, you also learn things from people where you say, why did they do that? You know, I don't want to do that, whatever that thing is. And they can be, that's part of your self-mentoring. Mm-hmm. But I, you know, recently I have 3 women who happen to be physicians that are so amazing in their own right. I mean, we're talking, you know, Harvard, Hopkins, Duke, MD, PhD combinations. I mean, just amazing women. There were 3 of them. And one of them And I'll just mention she's an African-American woman who got an MD, PhD simultaneously from Duke, is the first person to do that. And she's now head of bio. And she just got this position a month ago. And right before it was announced, she called me and told me and said, they're coming to my house to film me today for the launch of the announcement of me. And I was so proud of her. So now everyone in sort of the, medical research world is talking about her. And so I was talking to two of these other women physicians, and they both mentioned her unrelated to any of knowing that I knew her. And I said, oh, well, you must meet her. Oh, I'd love to meet her. I said, well, let's do it. I know her very well. I'm going to put all three of us together because I really wish that someone had done that for me. I've had many roles where I wish somebody would say, you need to meet so-and-so. And so I put them together and we've had a wonderful call and that kind of thing. But I will say that along the way, there are people who help you. And call on them. I've had people where I've just picked up the phone and said, I saw you and I think you're terrific. And I would love to have a short conversation with you about X. Something I do as a mentor, I stay with people. And, the term is often used, mentor. I really view myself more as a coach. Mm-hmm. And to me, coaches go deeper. I always start with, how are you? And that doesn't mean, what did you do at work today? How are you means, how are you feeling? How are the kids? Are things going okay? Because that's all part of your performance going forward, whether somebody's at home sick or, your kid just flunked out of college or whatever the case may be, that's all part of it. And see, to me, so my role model for mentoring is really more like coaches. The coach knows who you're dating. The coach knows if you passed your test. And to me, really good mentors will look at you as a whole person with a sense of friendship and support. And so that's sort of been my approach to mentoring people along and telling the truth. I'll give you an example. I have a woman who's a lawyer, brilliant woman, Vassar, Georgetown University. And she said, I really want to find another job. And I said, well, I know some attorneys. My husband's an attorney and I've known attorneys for a long time. And it happens that her area of expertise is malpractice. And so I said, why don't we, she says, but I can't right now. I don't know what I want. You don't know what you want? Well, no, I've got to, it's like gathering in the basket. Women always want to gather and they never have enough in the basket. And I said, no, your background is such that you could just be introduced to people and let them talk to you. It's not, you're going to them for a job. You're just going to present yourself and to have them talk to you about who they are and what they do. And, it's sort of, at least my experience is it meanders around and then you find a spot. And she is so concerned about not being able to present herself with, I want to do this and this and this, and most of us aren't like that. I have a best friend who's an OBGYN. And she said the day she was born, she knew she wanted to be an OBGYN. Well, she's one of 11 children. That's not a surprise, okay? But many of us don't have her background. And so we don't necessarily know what we want to do. And so, many times you know what you don't want to do. And that to me can be very helpful. But open the door and let your experience and network help you.
Yeah, great thoughts and suggestions. And, And what your career has reflected too is being open and watchful in terms of what those other opportunities may be. And as you know, it's not necessarily at all a direct path, right? It meanders, right? And the more interesting, challenging, and fulfilling opportunity may not be that direct line. It may be something that's different. And so keeping your parameters wide enough to be appreciating where those opportunities may sit, I think is an important. I even say that to the associates, the junior associates, which is, when I started the practice of law, I was an international telecom lawyer, and that because it was a huge growth industry. This was in the late 80s. That was the dynamic area to be in. It evolved over time, just as the market and the legal profession and the needs and demands evolved, and the interesting areas of practice evolved, right? And so always remaining open to where that path may take you and not hesitating to go down a different path or take a jog perhaps off of the actual, formal, more established path forward, I think always is a good suggestion. At least keep your parameters open. And one of the things that we had talked about previously, which I think would be good to address on this call is, in your different positions, and as we move up through the ranks, there are really different leadership and management skills that really are brought to bear, and maybe anticipating those and what you may need in order to be prepared, as you say, be prepared for that next opportunity and then take it. Anything along those lines that you'd like to share with us today, Marcia?
One of the things that I have found is many times people think they want something and they really don't. And I say that because, for example, many people always want to say, I want to be in the C-suite. I want to be the executive. And they're good managers and they've done well there. And I say to them, it's a different arena. And everyone isn't interested or suited for the arena. So, for example, I have found that being an executive leader comes certain power and authority, but you've got to be willing to use it. And you have got to often take risks. And there are many people that become comfortable managers. They've got a project, they've got a program, they've got a client portfolio, and they're very comfortable with that. But to move to the next level is really a very different level experience. And everyone doesn't want that visibility. You become very visible. You have to own that visibility, their expectations, and know that you are being watched and you're being noticed. And some people don't want that, and that's fine. But do know that comes with it. So, for example, with me, I would often have to talk to the press. Everybody doesn't want to talk to the press. And as you can imagine, with a government agency, you have to be very strategic about what you say and how it's presented, and different administrations, political, go back and forth. And while I was there, many of it back and forth, and you have to know what to say and how to say it. And you also need to be moving with a certain vision. And management and vision are not necessarily the same. And so, and I always tell people, you need to be bold. And bold doesn't necessarily mean loud or making a big to-do. I'll give you an example of something funny that was a bold initiative. When, as Marta indicated, at FDA, we were trying to move the needle related to women in clinical trials. And to some degree, some of our scientists, brilliant, brilliant people, felt it was an insult. It basically said, we're not doing our job, right? On the inside, it says, we're being criticized. We come here, we're brilliant scientists, we do our work, and some external somebody says, we're not doing our job. We're wrong. And you're being forced on us. We didn't ask for an Office of Women's Health. Congress mandated that. And luckily for me, I learned from my predecessors and by observation internally. So one of the things that I set out to do, and I got the right team to do it, was to put together a roadmap for women's health, right? Everything's not going to happen overnight, but we're going to incrementally change what's going on here. And of course, the legislation forced the correction of regulations and guidance, and that was already done. But the issue is cultural, right? Just because you've got a regulation or guideline doesn't mean you're going to change. And so I'd been there long enough to learn that I thought several things were needed, and one was training, right? Because I'm doing a good job, but I may not know the nuance of sex differences. So I had to bring in someone who could come in and train them to say, you know, you all are super smart. The new thing is, you know, we're going to do these various trainings, and we had to make them provocative and interesting. And, you know, we would have, you know, I don't know, breasts that looked like they had pasties on. I mean, whatever we needed to do to catch attention and get people to come. It was not erotic, but interesting. And so we would always have a full house training in new methodologies. The other thing that I did, which was funny with this roadmap, I got to present it to the executive team, right? So the director of the Center for Drugs and Center for Devices and Biologics, of course, the commissioner, the deputy. And I said, this is based on your priorities. That's one of the things I've learned. You need to know what the priorities are of not just your unit, but where you fit in the system. And you need to know what the power structure thinks is important. And if you can, be value added. I always say be value added to what they want. So, you know, you come in and it's the roadmap. And I, of course, said all of your division directors have signed off. We've worked, I've had my team work with them. But first, we're going to define who is a woman. If you could have seen the look on their face, that caught, because, you know, they're doing other things. They look up, who is a woman? And this, you have to understand, this was a decade ago, maybe a little more now, but who is a woman? Well, many of them didn't know that FDA, the different divisions, the different centers had different ages for who was a woman that was in legislation. So the Center for Drugs had 18, and the Center for Devices had 21, and the Center for Biologics had 17 or so. So I said, from the position of the office of the commissioner, we will say that you are a woman at 17, right? Because we had pediatrics and we didn't deal with peds or kids. A woman is 17. So they sort of went along with that. I said, and we're also going to say, you are who you say you are, and we will evolve with the science. That kind of shocked them, right? We're going to say, you are who you say you are, and it will evolve with the science. Well, FDA is science-based. That's what we always say. Who can object to, we will evolve with the science? And so that opened the door to issues related to transgender people. Yeah. That was bold, but it wasn't loud. It was consistent with the culture, but it's there. And from that point on, the trans community found our office and would come through us. That was one of the things. Constituencies, external constituencies, found the office to be a comfortable place related to their issues. We would pay attention and we could help them find opportunities to meet with people within the agency, throughout the agency, because we did sit in the office of the commissioner. So, as I've indicated, you need to be bold. You need to go where the power structure is. And that's not always the titular head. FDA has had many commissioners. I worked under 8 commissioners. And they're important, but they come and go. The director of the Center for Drugs has been there 22 years. If I want to make inroads as it relates to how drugs are reviewed, who do you think I need to have as my friend?
Sure, exactly.
So you learn these things as you go along, and you try to be value added based on their worldview.
Interesting. Thank you for that. So we've had a question, which I'm going to read out to you, saying, from Marta, saying, previously we had Katrina Adams, former CEO of the USTA, speaking about being the only one at the table and in the room. And we're wondering if you'd speak to us a little bit about being the only one, both woman and African American, at the table.
Well, the first thing I say is own it. When I first came into the government right out of undergraduate school, and I had no supervisory staff, I was just a little staffer, and I was in a conference room gathering up my things, obviously very visible because most African Americans were at that time, 30 years ago, at the most secretaries. And so I was very obvious, and I picked up my little things, and someone who was like 4 levels above me came to welcome me. And he said to me, "It must be so hard for you with your double burden." And he smiled. And I said, "Double burden?" And he said, "Yes, being Black and a woman." And without hesitation, I said, my mother told me those were my greatest assets. And I smiled. And for a moment, he had to even question himself. But what it said to me is, you are different. I don't care what you do. You will be viewed as different. So you might as well own it and make people understand that it's a gift. So many times I would go into places, and I used to always tell my team, I have a seat at the table. And you all know where my seat. You sit there. Do not sit against the wall. You sit at the table and let everybody know the Office of Women's Health is here. Just like I told the young woman, you're Johns Hopkins. You're from the best school of public health in the world. Own it. As a woman, we have certain things that are of value. One of the things that I remember Janet Thomas saying last week was she went and met with her constituents. And that became a very powerful tool for her. And that is something women do. We communicate. We like to use our emotional as well as our other intelligence to navigate things. And from that point on, and as the gentleman told me, I needed to strut. Oh, I've been strutting ever since.
That's great. Well, let me ask one closing question, then we'll go to a summation, and Meg has some remarks as well. But what I'd like to just take a moment and get your views on.
Uh-oh. Tara?
Yeah, I think Tara has cut out very briefly. So until we can get Tara back in, this is Diane Silverman. I have to ask, is there a book of Marcia-isms in the works? Because I know that I could see Marta and myself and Tara as well writing down notes as quickly as possible, just trying to capture all of these nuggets.
Well, it's very funny. One of my mentees, whom I haven't mentioned, used to be my director of, um, my medical director. And for those who may not know it, and you can look at me and tell that I'm a feminist, a devout liberal, all of those things. And I hired a woman who was the founding director of the Laura Bush Women's Health Institute to be my medical director. And she was fabulous. And we got along beautifully. And she's now one of the few women deans of a medical school. And she said to me, I would never have applied for this job if I hadn't worked for you. And so she has invited me to do a mentor mentee book collaboration together, talking about these kinds of things. Um, and one of the things, and I'll finish with this, is I often say to women who ask me about the next step, you are enough. You're enough. So often we think that the basket isn't full enough. Oh, I don't have this. Oh, I don't have that. Yes, you do. You're going to be fine. You will learn on the job. What you don't know, you will master. It is not a problem. You are enough. And that is one of the things she said really motivated her to be currently a dean of a medical school, which is often a rare event. So yes, we hope to work on something. I don't know. We'll see.
Well,
It'll be fun.
from the comments that are coming up through the chat, you have a list of people waiting to buy the book already. This is obviously going to be a very well received and very timely book. Thank you so much. I think that it looks as if the storm that's working its way up the East Coast is taking some of our listeners out. Fortunately, we're still recording, but we've even lost Meg. So this is,
oh wow, okay.
So we've lost Meg and Tara both. So I just want
Diane. Oh,
okay. Okay. There we have it. Okay, if we see Meg come back on, we'll certainly pull her on. But Marcia, I cannot thank you enough. I consider myself so fortunate to have been in on the phone calls with you from the beginning. Anyway,
let me say something else too. One of the things that often happens is we put ourselves last and we miss opportunities for ourselves. Particularly as we are trying to accomplish things on the job and we care about our team and on and on and on. And, as you go through this, one of the things I also encourage people to do is to go as high up as you can and invite yourself, open the door to them inviting you to higher levels. So if you hear someone, go up to them and say to them, that was so interesting. The next time you go on the Hill, or the next time you're in one of the board meetings, I would love to just be able to come and observe. And it's amazing how many times people say, okay, I didn't know, I didn't think about it. And when they invite you, you need to be ready, right? You have to come in looking like you belong in the room. And so be sure that you are ready to be ready. I graduated undergraduate school from Howard University. And one of the things they used to say is we're lucky. And why are we lucky? Because luck is when opportunity meets preparation. Always be prepared to do the next level of activity and look for people to help you. And many times they will. So this has been helpful to me because as this is now my new passion, right? I'm enjoying talking with people on their way to do great things. And this has helped me hone my skills. And so I appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you. And I would love to put out another Marcia-ism, because now I'm calling them Marcia-isms, that you mentioned in a previous call, that you said, if you want something, you have to ask. Don't be afraid to ask, because people are not going to know what you need or want unless you put it out there. So Marsha, we need you. Thank you so very much for this. Thank you for Tara, who's not here, this unfortunate storm, but thank you for letting us record this. Amy Brown says that your memoir is waiting to be written. So you've got a huge fan base here already. Thank you very, very much. So I will start closing before we lose anyone else with this storm. We have a few events coming up at Quorum. We have Claude Silver, who is the Chief Heart Officer for VaynerMedia, who will be speaking to us in September. And also Hope Johnson, who is a Quorum member who is an executive search professional who's talking about what successful job candidates are looking for now. So anyway, before the storm takes anyone else, Marcia, thank you. I will be sending out, there are lots of thank yous that are coming on through the chat function. Lynn Murphy-Rivera, our New York co-chair, one of them, saying she appreciates all the guidance and authenticity. And Rashida, you continue to inspire and motivate me. You are truly, truly brilliant. So your fan club continues to go on. So anyway, and Milbert, a huge thank you. So I will go ahead and close now and just thank you, Marcia. It is such a joy and such an honor to meet you, and we are so grateful as a community that you spoke with us. So thank you all for joining us today, and we will look forward to keeping Marcia in our community. You're just incredible, so thank you. So thank you, everyone, and please be safe in this storm.
Thank you.
Oh.